2 weeks ago, the United States crossed 100,000 COVID cases in one day for the first time ever. Now we're seeing cases top 150,000 per day, and there's no sign of relief from Washington. But take a look at the S&P 500 index since June. It's risen by more than 16%. So why does the stock market continue to climb alongside the staggering jump in new COVID cases? Bloomberg Wall Street reporter Sonali Basak is here to explain. Why doesn't Wall Street feel the pain that small businesses are feeling?
Well, if you think about what makes up the S&P, you're talking about the largest companies in America, let alone the world. And when it comes to surviving through this pandemic, there is money readily available to these companies, right? They can borrow from the bond markets, where people are seeking even riskier bets these days because interest rates are so low and it's really hard to find a way to make a return elsewhere. But when you look at the smaller companies, the ones that are outside of the S&P, it's harder for them to find the money they need to survive through this crisis. And as you know, as we just said, that's much different for the biggest companies in the S&P.
So what options do these small businesses have, especially as Congress hasn't gotten its act together to provide continuing relief?
Well, that's the unfortunate thing. Not a lot, right? So Goldman Sachs did a small business survey, and they found that at more than at any point in time in this crisis since April, that more companies are uncertain about making it through the end of this year. And that's especially true for businesses of color and women-owned businesses. So, and a third, by the way, Tim, a third of those businesses are dipping into their personal savings to keep their firms afloat.
So let me get this straight. A third of the businesses, according to this survey, are actually dipping into their own personal savings rather than business savings in order to keep their businesses going.
Exactly. And if you're a Black-owned business, it's actually 2/3.
And I think the problem here is that we see no sign of anything actually happening in Washington, at least not until January. What does that mean for the remainder of the year and for all of these people who own and run these businesses and the people who work for them?
Well, a lot of them may not survive, and that's a tough reality for everybody, especially as we're seeing some areas consider closing down or closing more businesses or limiting how long they're open. Even in New York City, we know that there's kind of a 10 p.m. cap now on a lot of restaurants and whatnot. So it looks tough out there for the next couple of months. And even some of the more optimistic people on Wall Street, even people who've made a lot of money, for example, Scott Minerd, the CIO of Guggenheim, who has a lot of his portfolio tied to the aircraft industry, he's doing well, right? He's doing pretty well, putting a lot of money to work. But he actually thinks when it comes to COVID and when it comes to the economy, the worst is yet to come.
I think it's a scary thought, not just for where our country is and where the world is, but also for the people who make up the engine of the U.S. economy, these small businesses, these service sector employees. Right. What is the important data that you think lawmakers need to look at? Because I think the stock market gets so much attention.
Right.
And I'm actually surprised that President Trump hasn't been tweeting about the stock market because it has been doing so well. And he is still the president right now. He hasn't been tweeting about it regularly like he used to. And I wonder if policymakers are looking at the stock market and getting mixed signals about where we are as a country.
I think policymakers are pretty aware of how bad it is for small businesses, for example, and that is an issue. A lot of people understand that immediately there needs to be money going to small businesses. One area of contention is state and local governments. That is something that both sides of the aisle don't know whether they want to put money towards. But let me give you another statistic. JP Morgan thinks that the unemployment rate that the Fed is targeting, they won't reach it until 2023. And that's not only because of the service sector being so underwater, but because state and local governments are not able to put as many people to work.
Let me make sure I get that right. We're not going to reach the employment figure or the unemployment figure that the Fed is targeting for at least 2.5 more years?
Correct. And so even in the middle of this year, we have seen some of the biggest money managers come out and say that maybe 2022 is the year that things will start to return to normal, pre-COVID levels. But now you're hearing both regulators, Randy Quarles of the Fed, also said that it could be until 2023 to return to pre-COVID levels. So you're seeing this horizon extend even longer.
Okay, so let's dig into the S&P 500 because I know you have some data that shows that the overall numbers can be misleading about how those 500 largest companies in the U.S. are doing because it's so overweight technology, right?
Yeah, think about what makes up the S&P. The top 5 technology companies can be as much as 20% of the market cap of the S&P.
That's a really important point.
Exactly.
These companies like Apple and Microsoft are a fifth of the entire S&P 500.
And On top of that, if you look at the entire technology sector, technology, communications, these are the Netflixes and whatnot of the world too, that's almost 40% of the makeup of the S&P, of the weightings. And whereas consumer, for example, some of these places that are kind of up and down, depending on how they adopt technology, is less than 20%.
So what that tells us, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because technology stocks have done so well, the S&P 500 as a metric for how well the market has done is a little misleading because it tends to inflate tech just because of the size of tech and the way that it's weighted versus the companies that haven't done as well.
It's enormously misleading because if you look at technology stocks are going to do well even with a pandemic raging. If a pandemic is continuing on and cases are going up, people are going to stay inside and use their technology more, right? So it's not necessarily going to tell you.
What are your sources telling you about vaccines? Because we saw this week a huge jump in the markets because of the news from Pfizer and other positive news about vaccines. But it's sort of like easier said than done, right?
It's pretty incredible, right? Because you want to look at the health experts, but people are looking to Wall Street because the market was soaring on Monday. But the people who are at the top of these companies, they all know that even having a vaccine is going to take a long time to distribute. And so a recovery doesn't mean, okay, we have a vaccine, that's a silver bullet. It's still, even after a vaccine is created, would take a long time to distribute more widely.
Bloomberg's Wall Street reporter Sonali Basak, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.